July 3, 1863. A Pennsylvania morning, already heavy with heat and the smell of gunpowder from 2 days of fighting. 13,000 Confederate soldiers are about to walk across an open mile of farmland, straight into the muzzles of entrenched Union artillery. One of the most senior generals in the entire Confederate Army has already told his commander, clearly and directly, that this will not work. He's done the math, he's read the ground, he knows, and he gets overruled anyway. That general is James Longstreet, and the question worth sitting with isn't just whether he was right, it's why being right wasn't enough. If you love uncovering fascinating stories about the American Civil War and the aftermath, consider subscribing to the channel. It's easy to overlook Longstreet when the conversation around the Civil War gravitates toward Lee's brilliance or Jackson's audacity. But strip those names away and Longstreet stands as one of the most operationally sound minds the Confederacy produced. Born in 1821, raised in Georgia, he came up through West Point the hard way, not by academic distinction, but by sheer presence and leadership ability. He fought in Mexico, took a wound at Chapultepec, and by the time the Civil War broke open, he'd already spent 2 decades learning what combat actually costs. Lee called him his old warhorse. That wasn't sentiment, that was recognition. At 2nd Manassas, at Fredericksburg, at Antietam, Longstreet repeatedly demonstrated an ability to hold ground, absorb pressure, and read an engagement without losing his nerve. His philosophy, stated plainly in his own writing, was offensive strategy but defensive tactics. Advance into enemy territory if you must, but let them break themselves against your position. That idea sounds conservative. In practice, it was devastatingly effective, and it put him on a collision course with Lee at the worst possible moment. After Chancellorsville in May 1863, the Confederate High Command was riding a complicated kind of confidence. They'd beaten a larger Union force again, but they'd lost Stonewall Jackson to friendly fire. Lee proposed pushing north into Pennsylvania to relieve pressure on Virginia, gather supplies, and perhaps force a political crisis in Washington. Longstreet had reservations from the start. He pushed instead for shifting resources west, reinforcing the struggle around Vicksburg, or strengthening Braxton Bragg in Tennessee. Lee overruled him, and Longstreet accepted that, but according to his own account, not without an understanding. He claimed Lee agreed the campaign should remain defensive in nature, that they would find good ground and force the Union to come to them. Lee later denied any such agreement existed. Whether the misunderstanding was genuine or convenient, it planted a seed of tension that would flower at exactly the wrong moment. The battle itself wasn't planned. On July 1st, Confederate infantry stumbled into Union cavalry west of Gettysburg, and what began as a skirmish cascaded into a full engagement. By evening, Union forces had been pushed back through town onto the high ground south, Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, the long spine of Cemetery Ridge, stretching toward 2 modest elevations called the Round Tops. It was excellent defensive terrain. Meade's army began entrenching. Longstreet arrived that night and immediately saw what the ground meant. He urged Lee to disengage, sweep around the Union left flank, and find a position between Meade's army and Washington. Doing so would force the Union to come off that high ground and attack on Confederate terms. Lee's response was direct. "If the enemy is there tomorrow, we must attack him," Longstreet pushed back. He pointed out that if Meade was staying put, it was probably because he wanted to be attacked. Lee didn't move. Look at it this way, Longstreet wasn't being timid, he was applying the same logic that had made Lee so effective in Virginia. Use the landscape, make the enemy pay to cross open ground. The difference was that now it was the Union holding the high ground, and Lee seemed to regard attacking uphill as the natural order of things regardless. July 2nd brought delays and difficult fighting. Longstreet's corps struck the Union left through the Peach Orchard, the Wheat Field, and Devil's Den. Brutal, close-range combat that bent the Union line without breaking it. Colonel Joshua Chamberlain's regiment made a desperate bayonet charge at Little Round Top and held it. By nightfall, thousands were casualties on both sides, and Cemetery Ridge still belonged to Meade. That evening, Longstreet again suggested a flanking movement. Lee pointed at the map and said he intended to strike the center the next morning. This is where the historical weight really settles. Lee's plan for July 3rd called for roughly 12,500 men, Pickett's fresh Virginia division, combined with brigades from A.P. Hill's corps, to advance across nearly a mile of open farmland through artillery fire up a gradual slope and break the Union center at a bend in the stone wall known as the Angle. A massive Confederate artillery barrage would precede the assault and, in theory, silence the Union guns. Longstreet opposed it plainly and without softening his words. He told Lee that in his entire career, from skirmishes to army-scale engagements, he had never seen 15,000 men capable of taking a position like that. He warned that pulling troops from the right flank would expose a dangerous gap. He asked for at least 30,000 men if any assault was going to be attempted at all. Lee's response amounted to a belief that his soldiers could go through anywhere, that the victories of the past had proven them nearly unbreakable. This is where something important happened, not on the battlefield, but in how command cultures work. Longstreet had done everything a subordinate general is supposed to do. He'd raised his objections through proper channels, clearly and repeatedly. And when he was overruled, he accepted the order, because that's the structure he operated within. But the weight of what he believed he was ordering crushed him. He later wrote that he had never been so depressed as on that day. When Pickett came to him and asked directly whether to advance, Longstreet couldn't form the words. He nodded. The artillery barrage opened around 1 in the afternoon, over 150 Confederate guns firing for nearly 2 hours. It was the largest cannonade of the war. It also largely overshot the Union infantry, doing less damage than hoped and depleting Confederate ammunition critically. When the Confederate infantry stepped out at roughly 3 o'clock, they advanced with discipline, closing ranks as men fell, maintaining formation across fences and road crossings while Union guns tore gaps from multiple angles. It was, by any measure, a remarkable display of soldiers doing what soldiers do under conditions no one should be asked to endure. Brigadier General Lewis Armistead led a small contingent over the stone wall at the Angle, the deepest Confederate penetration of the assault. That moment is called the high water mark of the Confederacy. It lasted minutes. Union reinforcements converged from multiple directions, and the breakthrough collapsed. Armistead fell mortally wounded beside a Union artillery piece. In roughly 30 minutes, it was over. Pickett's division lost nearly 2/3 of its men. All 3 of his brigade commanders went down. Total Confederate losses for the day exceeded 6,000. When the survivors streamed back, Lee rode to meet them and took personal responsibility. All this has been my fault. Now here's where the historical record gets distorted in ways that matter. For decades after the war, a group of Confederate veterans and writers, Jubal Early prominent among them, constructed what historians now call the lost cause narrative. In this version, Gettysburg was lost not because of strategic miscalculation, but because Longstreet failed to attack at sunrise on July 2nd as allegedly ordered, sulked his way through the battle, and delayed out of personal disagreement. The problem is that the evidence doesn't support it. No documented sunrise attack order exists for July 2nd. Longstreet's delays that day were partly caused by a necessary rerouting to avoid detection, and the assault, when it came, was one of the most effective of the battle. Even critics of Longstreet tend to acknowledge that the July 3rd assault was the central miscalculation, and that one belongs entirely to Lee. The real reason Longstreet became a scapegoat is uncomfortable but worth saying plainly. After the war, he became a Republican. He supported Reconstruction, he took a federal appointment, and cooperated with the government that had defeated the Confederacy. In the political atmosphere of the post-war South, that made him a convenient villain. History was rewritten to match the politics. Modern historians working from the primary sources are far more measured. Longstreet's tactical instincts at Gettysburg were largely sound. His opposition to Pickett's charge was well-reasoned and, as it turned out, correct. Gettysburg didn't end the Civil War, but it fundamentally changed its trajectory. Lee's army retreated into Virginia and never launched a major offensive into Union territory again. The same day the charge failed, Vicksburg surrendered, splitting the Confederacy along the Mississippi. The prospect of European recognition for the Confederate cause, already fading, effectively died. It's worth pausing on what Longstreet was actually asking for. Not surrender, not retreat from the campaign, a flanking movement that would have shifted the tactical problem back onto Union shoulders. Whether Meade would have overreacted, whether Lee could have found better ground, whether the war's outcome would have changed, none of that is certain. What is certain is that the argument Longstreet made on the morning of July 3rd, 1863, was the same argument any reasonable military analyst would make looking at that terrain today. Open ground, elevated defenders, massed artillery, a mile of exposure. He saw it clearly, he said it directly, and the charge went ahead anyway. James Longstreet lived until 1904. He served as a diplomat and a railroad commissioner and spent a fair portion of his later years writing and defending his record. The scapegoating followed him until his death and beyond. The fields at Gettysburg are a national park now. The angle is marked. The path the soldiers walked is preserved in the landscape. You can stand on Seminary Ridge and look across to Cemetery Ridge and understand immediately and without any special knowledge what Longstreet was seeing on that July morning, which brings up a question worth leaving in the comments. When a subordinate has both the experience and the evidence to challenge a plan, what does it actually take for that challenge to change the outcome? Is it a failure of command structure, of personality, of the particular pressure of past success? What do you think Longstreet could have done differently, if anything, that might have actually changed Lee's mind?